Now, I've also got on the call Brian Basham, who's was a financial journalist, and also is quite aware of what's happening with the markets, I think, and other things around the world affecting that are affected by what's happening in the Ukraine. Brian, what's your take on sanctions? Are they going to work? Will they stop the Russian invasion? What's the purpose of them, do you think?
Complete pinprick. It won't do anything at all. As you pointed out, a lot of countries aren't joining in the sanctions, and let's forget that all the time oil and gas prices go up, they benefit Russia because Russia sells oil and gas. But it's just not going to have any effect at all. And Russia is rapidly becoming an autarky. It's rapidly becoming a country that is self-sufficient. China's the effect of all this is going to mean that China's going to become insular and try to increase its internal markets, and probably do a lot for internal wages in China, but nothing for wages here. People here are going to suffer hugely. I mean, Martin Lewis, who's a really good guy, who runs the money saving expert site. I don't know what his politics are, but he's pointing out that energy bills are going to go up from 800 quid to 3,000. And he's talking about absolute poverty. He's talking about people already cutting back on food. And as of course we know, it's all predated. There's a real danger in here that the Tories will stand up and say, "Oh, well, it was COVID and the war." Of course it isn't. It's cuts going back to austerity and totally unnecessary austerity. George Osborne's ridiculous claim that because we were 60 billion short on balance payments, we had to have austerity is complete rubbish because we can tax. Prem Seeker has been pushing for a wealth tax for ages. You've seen, I just got some numbers on the screen here. You've got some, Bernie Sanders has tweeted, company revenue since last year, Exxon's gone up 57%, Chevron's gone up 84%, Shell's gone up 49%, BP's gone up 45%. He's arguing for a windfall tax. Of course it's right. If you were to tax the people with wealth of over 100 million, they wouldn't 10%. They wouldn't feel it. And I think you raised 69 billion. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's all to do with tax. It's going to have the most.
Can I just come in? Are you suggesting that the sanctions idea is a bluff for these companies to make lots of money out of it? So we're doing our part by sacrificing our money on our fuel. We're not putting our heating on to help the Ukrainians and to stop the Russians, while all these others are making a fortune, and the sanctions aren't really doing anything to those who need to be hurt in Russia.
I wouldn't say it's a bluff. It is a futile gesture. And of course, Kwasi Kwarteng has said, the public will bear this with fortitude. Well, the old Etonian public will bear it with fortitude, I'm sure, because it won't affect them. But it's going to affect people. But Martin Lewis is talking about starvation. And he's talking about people dying. I mean, blessedly, in a way, this is all happening with the summer coming on. But what would happen? What's going to happen in the winter? And we've got huge problems. It's going to lead to also. Somebody just mentioned fracking. Forget it. Fracking is going to be brought back. There'll be new oil drilled for wherever we can get it. Coal might come back. It's going to be desperate, and quite rightly. Everyone's pressing. Well, Martin Lewis is more effective than Keir Starmer, but Martin Lewis is pressing for greater assistance. But the government can't keep giving assistance. I mean, it can, but it's just got to keep printing money. And if it keeps printing money, quantitative easing, inevitably that's going to lead to greater inflation. It's only not given to greater inflation at the moment because we've had substitution, because we've had cheaper imports coming from other countries. And because we've had the effect of AI, of computerization and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it looks pretty dire. And apart from anything else, we've got those evil bastards, the Saudis, who are now, having been asked to divert oil to Europe and the UK, are now saying, sure, but we want more arms to bomb the Yemenis. And the Yemeni is already suffering a human disaster which is much greater in the Ukraine. It's awful. I was reading a story the other day, and I was halfway through it, and it was of a woman, a poor woman, a real tearjerker. You felt she was on her own. She had been working in a kitchen, and a bomb had fallen and completely wiped out the whole of her family, and she was on her own. Sure, but it was in Yemen, and it was an American drone. So we've got the most terrible things happening. And the Saudis, I mean, why? There's no morality, is there? I mean, the Saudis, I just read in the Guardian this morning, in the Observer this morning, executed 81 people in one day. These are vile people, and we're going to have to deal with them more. And the real issue was highlighted by Alan Duncan, a man I've known for years. I don't much like a high Tory, but he was an oil trader, and he pointed out in a very good radio interview the other day that you can transport oil. You just get a ship and take it from one place to another, and you can't do that with gas. It goes down pipelines, and the main pipeline for us runs through the Ukraine, and it's one of the reasons why Putin's invaded. One of my friends, who's a real Eastern Europe expert, interestingly, the people I deal with are mostly right-wing financial, gurus, really. But they're all pointing out that you've got two rotten regimes here. Don't think that Ukraine's a lovely regime. Zelensky was funded by the guy who Igor, whatever his name is, who funded the Azov Brigade. Now just have a look at the Azov Brigade insignia. It's a mixture of SS insignia, and Ukraine is the only country of which I've ever been aware in my whole life that has embraced neo-Nazis, blatant, proud neo-Nazis into its army. So it's a pretty awful situation. And Ukraine's been bounced into this by NATO. NATO have been expansionist for years. As one of my German mates said to me, he said, look, imagine if the Warsaw Pact had come along to Ireland, to the IRA, during the Troubles and said, look, we'll fund the IRA. And we want you, Ireland, to join the Warsaw Pact, and put Russian troops in Ireland. What would happen? It's not a great analogy, but it's pretty apposite. And this is there aren't two good sides. There aren't two sides. There is not a side to back in this. The only thing you've got to do is back the people, and the people who are suffering are working class people who are fighting each other at the behest of their masters. And I don't care whether they're Russian conscripts or Ukrainian conscripts or whatever it is. They're being forced into this by massive forces of capital. The great irony of all this is that Putin was put in position by exactly the same forces that Thatcher espoused: privatization, the theft of national assets, and the transfer of wealth, which has created a polarization of wealth around the world. And apart from anything else, it's devastated countries in southern America. It's caused the overthrow of democratically elected leaders around the world, in Iran, in Indonesia. It's a global financial movement of market forces that have made Putin, and NATO has decided that they have to surround Russia. You get buried in history here, but it all goes back to the Truman Declaration, which was flawed and foolish, which said that Russian communism was expansionist.
Right.
And there's another right-wing guy called Andrew Alexander who's written a really good book. He's now died the other day, proving, to my satisfaction anyway, he was a close friend, that the Cold War was a complete hoax, and it's all part of that. And Putin was left with no alternative, and the Ukrainians and Russians are going to suffer, and we're going to suffer too.